Hello everyone. I wanted to do a little video for what would have been our information for the synchronous session number 2. So this is all about policy and practice, which is our module 2 piece, where we're going to be stepping from, you guys have started to look at the bias, the inequity that you're seeing around your school, kind of dreaming big, what you can do about it. Now we're going to dig into our handbook for this next module and find a policy that is written and find out who that's affecting. Really, why is that policy there? Maybe what's an unwritten policy that people have been following your school, and looking specifically at that and what you know about how your district deals with writing policy and defending policy. Tonight, the ladies who made it to class, we had a great conversation, just a little bit about dress code and just a little bit about those things that we just don't even know if they exist in our school or how we're supposed to handle them. So I wanted to add a little bit more supplemental information to you all as you're reading and going through the Khalifa book. And remember, the supplemental information I give you is from a book by Shane Safier, and it's called The Listening Leader. It does line up very well with the Khalifa book also. So we're going to talk about just equity channels, and there's 3 specific channels, and awareness of these 3 different structures is going to help us in our leadership. So there's structural racism, and this is the ways in which the system conspires to produce racialized outcomes regardless of the intentions of the individual. So remember, we talked about white supremacy culture and how that doesn't mean you're a white supremacist. It just means that you're involved in a system that creates this privilege for white people, right, in white culture. So structural racism is kind of similar to that, in that our intentions may not be to be racist, but we are part of a system that has racialized outcomes. Unconscious bias, which is something we've been studying in all of our courses, and then of course cultural difference, which is the crux of everything that we're learning throughout these things. I really appreciate this diagram, which comes directly from the Listening Leader, and really, if we think about racism as a cage, right, and tuning into this kind of structural racism, if racism is only one piece of this cage, like for instance, if it's only school segregation, or if it's only access to quality food, we would be sitting back and kind of thinking, why can't anybody escape that situation? Why can't the bird get out of the cage, right? Why can't someone break free from the issue of not having access to quality food? Why can't you figure out how to get access to quality food? Because it's only one barrier standing in your way. But the thing about a bird cage is that the wires are all arranged in a specific way. They're formulated in a specific way with a specific size, right? So that the bird can't get out. And that's the exact same way it is for structural racism. Remember, it's structural. It's been built. It's been created in a specific way to keep people where they are. Kind of know your lane. So if you pause the video right here, you'll have a moment to take a moment and just kind of read those little pieces that I have about structural racism. As we're tuning into structural racism and thinking about it and considering it, we need to ask some questions of ourselves so that we can really begin to figure out what is structural racism, how are we a part of that? So some of the questions that Shane Safier comes up with is, what opportunity structures are available to my students and their families? So as a leader in our schools, we really need to consider, when we start to look at the barriers that are there, is what structures, what opportunities are actually there? And then, to what extent does our staff live within the same social and structural reality? And I find this one to be very funny because I know that you all have mentioned in your school system, there tends to be a lot of affluence. There's a large chunk of affluence, which teachers probably do not share. So it would be interesting to look at, on the affluent side of this, what opportunities and structures are available, and then how many of your staff actually have access to those structures also, to really understand what's happening in your school, your student populations. And then of course, what is my social location or access to opportunity, and how does that influence how I'm perceived? And then a lot of times teachers are considered to, be making a ton of money, right? Because teachers are professionals, and people assume that there's a certain socioeconomic status that is attached to being a teacher. How does that affect your power? Either whether positively or negative, how does that affect your power whenever you're involved in discussions and interactions? The next tuning into that we want to do, the next channel that we're going to turn into is the unconscious bias. And I actually have a video linked here, and I will drop this PowerPoint into underneath this presentation if you would like to watch this. But this is about microaggressions. And what I love about this video is it's very short, and it does it in cartoon form, and it makes it, it compares it to microaggressions to being mosquito bites. And it actually shows how mosquito bites build up until it's so annoying that you just can't stand it anymore, just like microaggressions. So some of these things we've talked about, and a lot of these you're actually going to be exploring within the readings and the viewings for this, this module here. But remember, these are all things. Unconscious bias takes place in Discourse 1, where we're working within our box because we don't see a way out. So that's going back to our last face-to-face session, is looking at those modes of discourse. So some of the reminders that we need to have are here. Basically, that schools aren't race neutral, and we need to remember that. And we also we need to be reminded that we can interrupt bias and microaggressions, right? And I love this one too. Focusing on individual acts of racism won't weed out the bad things. It's not going to ever fix the fundamental problem. Some of the questions we have to ask are listed there, but I do completely love the whole idea of looking at this question of what assumptions have been made about me that represent an incomplete or distorted story. And that's so important for us to not only look at our stories in that way, but our student stories and our parent stories also. So what is perhaps not really showing things in the correct light? When we tune into the cultural difference channel, we need to look at what these dominant culture promotes. And you can see I made a very short list there. But these also, if you think about what we learned about white supremacy culture, these also are tenets of white supremacy culture because the dominant culture is the white culture. So some of the things we need to keep in the front of our mind are reminders, right? Especially to listen and lead across cultures, we got to understand ourselves first. And that's something that we were discussing tonight a little bit, is how much change has taken place from the first course to this course. And just how now we're a lot more aware, but we're a little bit more at ease with having these conversations and having the thought processes that go along with them, that we're not as frightened by them. Then we need to look at some of the questions that come up too, like how often do I explicitly think about my lens when I'm actually listening to parents and colleagues? How often do I allow my lens to shape the story that I'm seeing in front of me? And then finally, just to leave you with this thought, it requires a lot of vulnerability to look in the mirror, to not look away or to blame the mirror, but to own it and decide to wake up the next day and be the author of meaningful change. And as we come to a close in this cohort, what's most important is that we don't walk away from that mirror, that we keep coming back to the fact that it's emotional, and everything that we're going to see and look at in ourselves is going to make us vulnerable. And sometimes we may feel this shame that comes along with it. But what we need to do is look beyond that and know that the next day we can wake up and make meaningful change despite whatever weaknesses we feel that we encompass at that time. I was talking with some of my undergrad students just about whenever we approach culture, we need to approach it with curiosity, and we need to approach it with love. And I know I've probably mentioned that in this course because that's one of my driving factors, is when you lead with love and curiosity, people tend to respond to that. And it's easier to have these tough conversations because you genuinely want to know and you genuinely care. All right, so as you go into this next module, you will be looking at, again, policies. So dress code policies, discipline policies, attendance policies. Pick what is most important to you and most intriguing to you, and then go into your student handbook. Find out if there's a discipline policy. Find out I'm sure hoping that there is. Find out if there's a dress code policy. Find out what one policy is intriguing to you, and then start to dig into thinking about who does it really affect. Who is it written for? Which students do you think, or have you found, probably suffer from that policy the most? The very last thing you're going to do in those 4 questions are going to be a part of a 2 to 3 page maximum paper about a policy in your school. Don't forget to go back through. You can use the videos, you can use the articles that you choose, or you can use the Khalifa text to actually discuss that. And don't forget to add those references into your final paper. All right, everyone, this is your welcome to Module 2. Look at this. Already a quarter of the way down. School year is almost over. Keep pushing. One thing I do need to mention is we are going to cancel our June 17th class because Pascack Hills, I believe it's Hills, is having a end of year teacher experience. So we're going to cancel that face-to-face. I'll make sure I put that in the announcements, type it up too, so that you guys who don't make it to the end of this video will definitely know that we will not have a synchronous class on the 17th. Thank you all very much. Have a good night.